Our guest on Caribbeana is Mr. David Abdullah. David is the head of the Movement for Social Justice Party, a political party in Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to our program again, David.
Thanks, Von, and thank you for having me, and greetings to all those who are tuned in, especially a number of friends of ours.
Right. Well, listen, things are waxing warm, not just in over here on this part of the Atlantic, but even in Trinidad. The elections has just been announced. How is the party going? How are you faring? What's the analysis of the situation? What's your interpretation of the movement?
Right, thanks. Well, we decided in January, and we made that announcement on I think it was the 14th of January, after intensive discussions internally in the party at the leadership level and at our second rank level, which we call the activists, not to contest the 2025 general elections. We decided that we would not have been able to mount a significant challenge for government because
You're freezing up.
In order to take 2 steps forward. So we are focusing on building MSJ for the future. So that's where we are at the moment. We will be making a number of interventions in the election campaign by way of some major statements, and we will keep you abreast of that. We will share those with you, of course. And we had to deal with one issue because a number of the trade unions, not the entire movement, but about 4 or 5 or 6 unions, decided that they would engage with the opposition party in Trinidad and Tobago, United National Congress, in what is called a coalition of interest. So a number of the MSJ activists also, second rank leaders in the oilfield workers trade union in particular. And so we had to take a decision to allow our activists to campaign for the two candidates in particular that the unions were putting forward in this coalition of interest with the UNC, and to allow our activists to engage in the campaign, but not to identify themselves as MSJ. They have to identify themselves with their union because MSJ is not part of the coalition.
Right.
And in fact, one of the candidates who's been put up by the union was an executive member of the MSJ, has been an executive member for quite some years. So because he's now contesting as a candidate of the UNC, he had to resign in accordance with our constitution and so on. So we were able to clear all those hurdles. But we are not part of any coalition, but we will be making an analysis, very detailed analysis of the situation, and offering some guidance, hopefully, to persons who are planning to vote and not yet made up their mind who they wish to vote for.
Right.
Now, the thing is, you're very right, things have moved very quickly because it was in January that the Prime Minister announced that he would be stepping down as Prime Minister, as Dr. Rowley, stepping down as Prime Minister towards the end of February after the CARICOM Heads of Government Summit, which was the last week in February, about a week before Carnival.
Right.
And the PNM then had a caucus of their MPs, which was a little messy because there was an 11-9 split in terms of who they wished to be the Prime Minister to replace Dr. Rowley. Eventually, the 11 majority persuaded the 9 who had supported Penelope Beckles that they should all support Stuart Young. And so Dr. Rowley then announced after Carnival that he was going to step down as Prime Minister on the 15th of March, which was Sunday last, a few days ago.
Right.
And the PNM had a final, a convention, and they announced their candidates in Woodford Square on that Sunday afternoon, the 15th, which was his last address as Prime Minister. And then on Monday morning, the 16th, Stuart Young was sworn in by the President as the Prime Minister. And according to the Constitution, all the ministers of government had to vacate their positions. And Stuart Young as the incoming prime minister, then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, then had the ministers sworn in. But there have been some changes in the cabinet.
Right.
And so there were lots of comments in the media by various people. They're looking forward to this new minister, whatever.
Right,
and they were making those comments on Monday into Tuesday. And then on Tuesday afternoon, Stuart Young, prime minister, then tells the country that we are going to the polls. Parliament was dissolved on at midnight on the 18th, which means that there's no parliament now. But the ministers will function until the elections of April 28th. The elections is on April 28th. Nomination day is the 5th of April. So it's a short sprint, a 5-week sprint between that announcement and the actual election date. But many persons were expecting an election around this time. In fact, the UNC has been out of the box with campaign ads on radio and television for the last 3 weeks or so, even before Carnival. So they have not yet chosen all their candidates. So they're behind the PNM in terms of choice of candidates, but they're ahead of the PNM in terms of advertisements and so on. So it's going to be a very dynamic election campaign. And then, of course, you have a number of other parties that are in the fray. There is Michaela Pandey's Patriotic Front. She says she's going to have 41 candidates. That we haven't heard the names of 41 yet. I think she's announced about 15. And then you have a coalition between Gary Griffith's National Transformation Alliance and Timothy Hammersmith, former COP leader and Senate President. He and Louis Lee Singh and others have a party called Hope. And there's a community-based group out of Central Community Reformation Network. And they're part of an alliance. So they're supposed to be fielding candidates. And then, of course, in Tobago, you have the PNM, of course, and you have Fali Augustine's party, as well as Watson Duke, and possibly another party led by Dr. Denise Sawyer-Fat Angus. So Tobago might be quite a crowded race. And then, of course, on the 29th of April, we will see, as the old saying goes, who dead or badly wounded, and who is still standing in the Gael, political Gael. Yes. So that's where we're at. But it's going to be, I think, not just a short campaign, but it's going to be very intense and quite nasty. A lot of statements have already been made that are quite nasty. So I don't know that it's going to do anything to bring the country together. So whoever wins, and there's been no polling as of now to say who is ahead. But whoever wins is going to deal with a very divided country and will have the challenge of being able to unite the country behind whatever policies that that person as a leader of the incoming government has to take the country forward. Because the country is in difficulty, as we all know.
Yeah. Well, in view of what is happening here in the United States, which is impacting the world, I mean, in trade and in all kinds of political situations, how do you see all of this playing out or impacting on Trinidad and Tobago? Because the Caribbean has been called on, has been attacked somewhat in their thing,
Yeah, I mean, at 3 levels. So one is the announcement by Secretary of State Marco Rubio that persons who are officials of a country, which country has an agreement with Cuba, for Cuba to provide health services through their medical brigades, doctors and nurses and so on, that those individuals would be sanctioned by either losing their visa, having a visa revoked, or not having a visa issued or renewed. Now, that has angered CARICOM tremendously because CARICOM has had a long-standing relationship with Cuba going back to 1973, when 4 CARICOM states, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Guyana, were the only 4 independent states in the English-speaking Caribbean at the time, were the first countries apart from Mexico to establish diplomatic relations with Cuba. So our diplomatic relations go back a hell of a long time. And we have had relations in terms of medical personnel. I mean, our second Olympian gold medalist, Keyshawn Walcott,
Yeah.
who won Olympics at the London Olympics, I think it was. He is coached by a Cuban coach, right?
Right,
You know,
right,
so we a lot of our students go to Cuba to study medicine and other kinds of disciplines, architecture, um, um, things like museum curating, and a
right,
whole range of things like that. So Cuba has been very um, supportive of the Caribbean, as it has been with many other countries in the world.
right, right,
And so to take this action angered CARICOM, and many prime ministers have spoken out saying that they are quite prepared to lose their visa if that is what it takes. But there are diplomatic conversations going on between CARICOM foreign ministers and officials of the State Department. But certainly Prime Minister Gonzalez of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mayor Motley Barbados, Keith Rowley of Trinidad and Tobago, and others have said that they're not prepared to accept that kind of bullying by the United States, that we are sovereign states and have the right to engage with other states. And if that, in order to provide benefits that our citizens require, then that is more important than a visa to enter the United States.
mm-hmm.
Now, and I come back to the opposition's position on that because they have a different position, which is of concern. The second issue, of course, is the position of the Trump administration and Venezuela. Now, initially, one thought there was a bit of a thawing because just before Biden left office, he put a 25 million US dollar bounty on the head of Maduro, saying anybody who could capture or whatever
Yeah,
Maduro,
yeah, yeah,
right, will get 25 million US. Of course, that's a joke, right?
yeah,
In real terms, but that's an indication of the thinking of the Biden administration. So shortly after President Trump took office, he sent an envoy down to Caracas who met with President Maduro, and therefore one thought there was a bit of a thawing,
right, right,
only for that to be reversed. Now, President Trump is very transactional, so he seems to want Venezuela to take back a whole set of its citizens who were
right,
allowed
right,
entry into the United States. They didn't come in illegally. They were
right,
allowed entry under a program that the Biden administration provided in an attempt to undermine Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Haiti.
right,
So citizens of those countries were given a kind of free passage into the United States.
yeah,
And I don't know what the estimate is, over 100,000 Venezuelans took advantage of that in the US.
yeah,
So Trump wants them deported. And that hasn't been worked out. And I think that the action that Trump and Rubio have stated, that they're going to terminate and revoke all of the licenses of countries that are and companies that are engaged in oil exploration, production, etc., in Venezuela will be cancelled. So Chevron, for example, which is a US company,
right,
has been operating in Venezuela for a long time and
right,
has been pumping a significant amount of oil out of Venezuela into the United States for refineries along the Gulf Coast of the US. And so Trump announced that OFAC license will be revoked has been revoked, and Chevron has to stop pumping oil. Now, I suspect that Chevron is
we're freezing up a bit.
the US needs that crude to go into US refineries to produce gasoline and other products for the US consumers. So we see how that plays out. But of course, there's anxiety in Trinidad and Tobago about whether the agreements and the licenses that were, agreements between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela will be able to be implemented, given that one of the licenses that Trinidad and Tobago obtained is to produce natural gas from Venezuelan waters in what is known as the Dragon Field, which is very close to the north coast of Trinidad. And that project is being undertaken jointly by Shell, international company, and the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago. And the studies and the work and the preparations to do the infrastructure are very well advanced. And the plan is for that gas to come into Trinidad by about sometime mid-2027, about 2 years from now.
Right.
Now, there are two other gas fields of interest, but we shouldn't have a problem with that because those two gas fields straddle the border between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. Some of the gas is within our border, and those gas fields are Lorraine Manatee and Coquina Manikin. And Venezuela has agreed to allow Trinidad and Tobago to produce the gas from our side of the border. In other words, if there's 100 units of gas, and we have 40 on our side, Venezuela has 60, Venezuela's agreed that we could produce the 40. So that doesn't impact the US because that is not Venezuela's gas, that is our gas. But we shall see, because it seems as if the region is becoming once again a theater of conflict between major global players. And so we have to pay attention to what is happening, because of course the US is gunning for China, and China has major investments, has been doing work
in the region.
In the region. In fact, the last two public engagements outside of the PNM rally for Dr. Rowley as Prime Minister, one was the opening. The hospital is not yet functional, but the building has been completed of a new block in the Port of Spain Hospital. Is a very modern facility, and that was opened a week and a few days ago. And then in Tobago, the new airport terminal, Arthur A&R Robinson terminal building, that was also opened by Dr. Rowley. Again, that's not in use yet, to be in use in the next few months, but the building is essentially complete. And both of those projects were undertaken by Chinese construction firms. Yes.
Wow. Right.
Yeah.
Well, we have a situation to observe and to look see, what do you, before we conclude, what do you perceive will occur? Will all of this eventually dissipate? Because for people in the diaspora, there's not that kind of leadership like what we had with Maurice Bishop and these guys, and so there's a bit of a lacking of vocal leadership in the diaspora. What do you perceive could occur?
Yes, well, one of the concerns that we have here in Trinidad and Tobago is that the UNC and the Prasad Bissessa has been openly, their ads attacking President Maduro, calling him a narco trafficker and all kinds of other nasty names, right? And really, in that regard, talking about sanctions and so on, basically, adhering to the Trump agenda, which is very, very disturbing. The PNM has attacked her on that. We will make a statement about that very shortly as well, because we can't accept that kind of position by the Trinidad and Tobago government, whoever happens to be in government. They cannot be, pursuing an agenda that is the agenda of Mr. Trump or any country of the North, unless it really is in our national interest. So that is a concern. And in terms of CARICOM has been fairly strong compared to maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So you do have voices like Mia Motley. Dr. Rowley was quite a strong voice internationally. Ralph Gonzalez and so on. The young Prime Minister of Grenada, Declan Mitchell, has been also quite vocal. So, you do have some fairly strong voices in CARICOM. Not as radical as a Maurice Bishop or a Michael Manley, or a Forbes Burnham or Earl Barrow. But they have been, making some important points about our independence and our sovereignty and so on. And articulating positions like on climate change. Climate change is another major issue. The US withdrawal from the Paris Accord will impact us negatively, and also the US withdrawal from the WHO will impact us, because the World Health Organization provides funds through PAHO to countries in the Caribbean for health services and so on. So,
yes, we're freezing up. Okay.
Such a state of flux. You are sitting down in the seat of where a lot of that flux is happening. And it's very disconcerting. I get news alerts by the minute coming out of the US on decisions made by executive order. And then, even a situation now where, yesterday, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court had to
Right,
rebuke the
right,
president
right.
for the president threatening to impeach a federal judge. So, we are concerned about our sisters and brothers in the diaspora in terms of U.S. Policy with respect to immigrants.
Yeah,
And certainly we hope that good reason prevails, and that there's a recognition that Caribbean people who have gone to the US, like yourself and many others and so on, and have contributed immensely to American society, will not, be identified as persons who should not be or not part
right, right.
of this MAGA agenda. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we leave, Michaela Pandey, there was a lot pretended, talked about her and potentially. I mean, what is her position? Does she seem to be able to take over from the UNC folks?
It's going to be interesting. I mean, I have had conversations with her. I had conversations with her, a couple of them last year. I haven't spoken to her for a couple of months. And of course, she's probably very busy with the election campaign now. I know she's been reaching out to younger people, and it'll be interesting to see how many younger people decide to support her in these elections. Now, if the UNC was to lose this election, Kamla Prasad, the successor, that's the end of her political career.
Right.
She might remain in the parliament because she'll win her seat, but I mean, she cannot last another election loss, and therefore the UNC base support will be looking around to see who is best to provide political leadership.
Yeah.
Now, will that be Michaela? It will depend on how well she does in this 2025 elections, and whether people see her as garnering enough support and offering a vision and so on, that UNC base will say, okay, Michaela, come back into the UNC now.
Right.
Kamla, step aside, and so on. But there's a lot that can happen if the UNC was to win the election. So we don't have any polling, and I'm not going to hazard a guess on your program right now so soon, because as we know, a day is a long time in politics, 5 or 6 weeks.
Right.
So, but if Kamla wins the UNC wins the election, of course, Michaela will be out in the cold for quite some time, because the UNC will be in government and Kamla will be riding high, and so on. So there's a lot riding on these elections for a lot of the political parties. If the PNM loses this election, then I can't see Stuart Young remaining as the leader of the party, right? I think that there'll be pressure for him. He will win his seat, but I don't see him remaining the leader or becoming the leader of the party. Dr. Rowley is still the leader of the party.
Right.
So he has a lot riding. Tobago, there's a lot riding for Duke and for Farley, and so on. A lot riding for Kamla, a lot riding for Michaela. And so that's one of the reasons why MSJ said we are staying out, because after this election, I think the country will be looking for a real alternative. And that is where we hope we could build the MSJ into a strong, credible party. That when we're credible in the sense that people pay attention to what we say, but we have to generate the membership and the numbers and the strength that the country needs to provide a serious alternative to the two existing parties.
Right. David Abdullah, thank you again. It's always a pleasure talking to you, man. Some nice analysis, and we look forward to talking to you again. It won't be that long again, because the situation warrants it, and we need to hear voices in the region who express an understanding and analysis of what's taking place today. So you take care, man.
Thanks, Vaughn, and thanks for having me. And once again, greetings to all the folks who tune in religiously to Caribbeana.
Thanks.
Great work that you do.
All right. I've been speaking with David Abdullah, the head of the Movement for Social Justice, a political party in Trinidad and Tobago. This is Vaughn Martin. Caribbeana continues.